If you're like me, you've got a lot of books on your shelves. Sometimes you'll get questions about whether you've actually read them all. This can lead to fairly intense feelings of guilt. And even if no one asked you, it can be quite natural to question the tendency of collecting books that you haven't read. Sometimes these feelings can become so intense that it actually causes you to ignore your library because it just reminds you of the things that you haven't done. And this can lead to a vicious downward cycle. We certainly don't want that. But to echo the immortal words of Bob Newhart,
you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Stop it!
But really, there's a difference between bibliomania, collecting books for the sake of collecting, and actually building a library where you have books that you can reference for the rest of your life. Your library should serve as a resource and a reminder of intellectual humility. In this episode, we're going to examine those feelings and give you permission to have a different perspective or a way to think differently about your unread books. The ultimate goal or aim is to get to spend more time in your library surrounded by your books, whether or not you've actually read them. This hopefully leads to a virtuous cycle where you're spending more time in your library, reading, perusing, learning more, which causes you to want to spend more time doing those things. Plus, it doesn't hurt that this technique or perspective will give you permission to buy more books, whether or not you have a plan to read all of them. After all, books are different than other possessions. They represent stored or accumulated knowledge. Books literally contain the thoughts of another human being who wanted you to have them. Right before we get into the meat of this discussion, I want to remind you about our sponsor, Don's Magic and Books, who will help you build out your library so that you can have all of that accumulated knowledge and the thoughts of other magicians that they wanted you to have. Use the links down below to visit donsmagicandbooks.com, where you'll find all kinds of books that are waiting for a new home in your library and will serve as a valuable resource to you for years to come. One of the things you can already feel good about is saving on buying them, because when you buy with Don, he's offering a discount right now with the coupon code August. Apply that at checkout to save 10% off the lowest marked price, and if you buy $20 or more of media items, you'll qualify for free shipping in the United States. So as we get further into this episode, remember that when you want to build your library, be sure to check out Don's Magic and Books. Back to the discussion. All right, let's talk about the antilibrary. Yes, that's an actual term. And while it's a relatively recent one, it was coined by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and it describes the books we have but haven't read. Aha, there's a description for all of those books that we've been accumulating but haven't quite gotten around to reading. If it helps, I'll be the first to raise my hand and say that I have not read every book on my shelf. In fact, I have some that are still in the shrink wrap. Your library should be a living, growing resource that you can access for the rest of your life. So even if there are books out there still in the shrink wrap, it's going to be okay. At first blush, it seems like the anti-library may not serve much of a purpose. I mean, why have a book that's sitting on your shelf? But it actually serves a very big purpose. The whole idea behind an anti-library or accumulated knowledge on your shelves is that the more you learn, the more you realize there is to learn. You engage in a kind of intellectual humility where you recognize that while you've learned many things, there's an almost infinite amount of things that you have no idea about yet. This is in stark contrast to the person with a substantial amount of ego who thinks that because they've read some books, they now know everything there is to know about the subject. But the concept of the anti-library goes further, because while you surround yourself with books that you haven't read, you remind yourself of this intellectual humility, which means that you're always trying to grow and learn because you just recognize there's so much more out there. Think of it like a thirst for knowledge, if you will. It also provides you with a tool for research, for figuring out how to find out about something. So really, an anti-library is the tool of tools. Having knowledge at your fingertips that you know you'll access or have the ability to access even if you can't recall all the details. Because after all, when you read a book, you're going to forget most of what's in the book anyway. So being able to go back to your library and find that concept again is a very important skill to master. Which brings me to what are some of the tools that you could use to help you find things in books that you haven't read. I think at the top of that list is Dennis Baer's Conjuring Archive. Just such an amazing free resource that he has provided out there to categorize all kinds of books and tricks. So if you want to explore a topic more fully, this should be one of your first stops. With the archive, it's easy to find the books that reference the topic that you're trying to study. But you could take this a step further in your own work, and that's by keeping a good notebook. I did an episode on this a while back, and I encourage you, if you're interested in making progress, to check that episode out. But the gist of it is that you should write down the things that you're studying. As you go through Dennis Baer's Conjuring Archive and then subsequently get into your library to look at what those books have to say, take some notes about the things that you like or the things that you're learning. Because just like when you read a book and you'll forget what you read after a while, it's amazing to me how quickly we can forget our own thoughts about a subject. I've gone back through some of my journals and seen thoughts that I didn't even remember ever reading about. So it can be a very valuable resource for getting back into your own thinking, because everybody thinks a little bit differently and has a different perspective when they're approaching a specific topic. So if you can get back into your own head about how you approached this the first time, it might leave some clues for subsequent approaches and what might work best for you. So basically, journaling helps you keep track of your own ideas and pursue those things that keep you intellectually curious. And as you start to fill page after page of notes, it will also serve to remind you of the love that you have for this art of magic, whether you're a pro or amateur. Another resource is, well, selfishly, this channel. I try to bring to you books that I think would be of interest and point out maybe some tricks that I think are interesting or mentally stimulating. So being out there and absorbing magic in a variety of ways by talking to other magicians, watching this channel, etc., can lead you to think in new ways and cause you to want to explore a brand new topic that is waiting to be discovered on your own shelf. At the end of the day, there's no reason to feel guilty about the books that are on your shelf that you haven't read yet. They're simply treasures waiting to be discovered, but they'll be there for you when you're ready. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for building your own resource that will aid in your personal magical development. I can't tell you how many times I've read a book and then realized later I really wasn't ready for that material yet. But it's always great to know that it's there for me when I'm ready. And I know your library will be there for you when you're ready, because that's just what books do. So tell me, how do you feel about this concept of the anti-library? I want to hear your thoughts down below. As always, my friends, I appreciate you watching. And until next time, keep reading.